Results International Australia. For over 30 years, Results has been working with partners right throughout the world to try to bring an end to TB. And we are proud to be hosting this event in concert with the Australian TB Caucus today to mark World TB Day. And we're doing this event in partnership with a wonderful group of organisations, including the Burnett Institute, FIND, TBCRE, the TB Forum, Global Citizen, and the TB Alliance. So I want to extend a very warm welcome to each and every one of you, in particular our distinguished guests today. Many of you can see on the screen. We also have a much broader audience that we can't see on our screen today. They are joining us from every corner of Australia, so a very warm welcome to you. I'd like to start by acknowledging the lands that we are on, and we pay our respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. We have a fabulous lineup of panellists and speakers today, including, of course, our TB Caucus co-chairs. Joining us from Geneva, we've got the Director of the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB and malaria. We have a young Australian woman who's a TB survivor, a panel of distinguished TB experts, and joining us from the UK, the chair of the Global TB Caucus. I'll formally introduce our speakers as we proceed this morning. As many of us know, we are at a crossroads in the fight against TB. The COVID crisis has derailed years of progress against TB. And yet it's also a reminder of what can be achieved when the world joins forces with a shared mission to beat a pandemic. We need a similar scale response to tackle the TB pandemic. Just briefly, some housekeeping. Each of you has been emailed a World TB Day e-booklet, which we'll also put up in the chat function for you. If you want to know why TB is so important, why it's key to ending global poverty, and what role Australia can play, I strongly encourage you to take a look. It's an excellent read and it's been designed beautifully and won't take too much of your time. I also wanted to let you know that this event is being recorded. I'd now like to welcome the wonderful, the Honourable Warren Entsch, member of Leichhardt and the co-chair of the Australian TB Caucus. Warren has been a champion of this cause, both in Australia but also around the world, and in particular since the launch of the TB Caucus in 2016. A very warm welcome to you, Warren.
As World TB Day, and I certainly, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge our traditional owners, the land in which we meet, pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. All of our parliamentarians. We've got. I'm not going to go through the list. If we do that, I'll be here. That'll be half the time that I have, because we have quite a few participating today. Also, but I would like to, in particular, acknowledge those from the various embassies from that are on board today, our civil society partners, TV survivors, etc. And one member I would certainly like to acknowledge. Great to have you on board. World TB Day is an opportunity to remember the 1.4 million people who've lost their lives to tuberculosis over the last year. It's also an opportunity to reflect on our achievements and acknowledge the need for increased attention to infectious diseases. Planet. Since the time the Australian TB Caucus was established, and this back in 2016, so it's been a while. The Australian government's investment in tuberculosis has certainly significantly increased, and as the co-chair of the Australian TB Caucus, I'd like to thank the bipartisan support. We have very, very strong support across the chamber for from our parliamentary colleagues that have most certainly made this possible. But we do know that it's not over yet. I think the impact of COVID is really very well known. You know, the 1.4 million people that are going to die from TB as a result of COVID over the next few years is certainly a reality if we don't act now. And COVID certainly, if it's done nothing else, it certainly demonstrated that with global collaborations and funding, it's possible to accelerate the actions to manage pandemics. And I'm sure you'll agree that TB deserves a similar response, particularly given that we only recently acknowledged 100 years since the last vaccine on TB was formed back in 1921. So you know, COVID has shown us certainly that that we can do better, and we need to do better. And hopefully it'll also show us a few other pathways in accelerating a process for, of course, with the Holy Grail, which of course is a vaccine. The 2021 World TB Day theme, the clock is ticking, certainly reminds us of we have little time to lose if we live up to the promises our leaders have made at the UN's high-level meeting on TB in September 2018, where Australia pledged its support to end the TB pandemic. I'm certainly looking forward to hearing today from a speaker who has experienced TB personally, the experts who can provide more detail about the impacts of COVID-19 on TB and the progress that we are still making towards our identification and treatment of TB. I also look forward to the message from my colleague, Senator Seselja, Minister for International Development, Pat Conroy, our Shadow Minister for International Development in the Pacific, and of course, Senator Rachel Seward from the Greens. Is also provide an opportunity for all of my colleagues who are on the phone to give us a better education on where we are at the moment and what we need to do as we move forward. Today, 50 landmarks in Australia are going to light up to support TB awareness. Our Old Parliament House here in Canberra is one of those, and I encourage colleagues to make their way to Old Parliament House this evening at 7:30 p.m. to support this initiative. And finally, can I say, I'd like to certainly acknowledge Results Australia in particular, because they're the ones that recruited me into this advocacy back, I think, in 2014, and other partners in organising today's event and our impressive lineup of speakers. We'll now hand back to Nagia and introduce our next speaker. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Warren. I am privileged to introduce Demi Mason, who's joining us from the early hours of Perth. So thank you so much for being with us, Demi. And she's going to share her own story of TB. Thank you, Demi.
Thank you. I hope you can all hear me. So yeah, I'd just like to say good morning and thank you so much for joining us today to commemorate World TB Day. I'm very privileged to be asked back to speak and share a little bit of my story. I'm sure quite a few of you have heard of it before, but if you haven't, yeah, I am Demi Mason. I'm from Perth, WA. I had TB when I was 18, so showing my age, I'm not that old, but 10 years ago now, almost. And it's taken a while to get to the point that I am at, to be able to like speak confidently and feel like I can be a voice for those that don't have the opportunity to speak about what they've been through and share their story. But I'm very grateful to Results WA for championing my story as much as possible and helping me share a message that I'm very passionate about as well. I've been involved with Results for quite a few years now, first in the UK, and then when I came back to Australia, I continued on with them. And this last 12 months has definitely been a challenge for the TB program worldwide, obviously, as you all know, because of COVID. But I think it's also been a positive as well, if we can try and look on that side of things, because it's brought infectious disease back to, you know, the forefront of the developed world, which I think most have become quite complacent about and felt that we were quite immune to it. So we are definitely not, and that still exists. And just speaking to people about tuberculosis, I'm just still amazed how many people don't know about it at all. So that's really my messaging, and it's really just to educate people on it, because it has been something that's impacted my life greatly. And most recently, I felt like I couldn't really do much more than share my story, which is great. And I love doing it because I know that it's helping in some aspect to get the message out there, especially from my demographic as well. I've lived in Australia my whole life, apart from stints somewhere else. So it does affect anyone and everyone. But I felt like I needed to do more. So I've just started nursing actually with the endeavour to do more in the humanitarian side of things from a professional point. So yeah, that's something that has pushed me down that path, having TB, otherwise I probably wouldn't have done that. And yeah, I'm very grateful to be able to have a small platform to share that with you all. And yeah, I just think that with the help of the Australian government, and I'm very grateful for all the MPs that are here today and willing to listen and learn. I think whether it's small or large, we can all help to strengthen our global health system. So yeah, thank you so much for having me today. And I really look forward to listening to everyone else speak on the panel.
Thank you so much, Demi. We're always struck by your courage in sharing your story, and we appreciate it very much and appreciate you joining us from the early hours in Perth this morning, so thank you. I'm now very honoured to introduce Peter Sands, who's the Executive Director of the Global Fund, a partnership which of course aims to end AIDS, TB and malaria. Peter's going to be talking to us about the Global Fund's role in this moment of crisis. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to start by thanking Warren, the Honourable Warren Ench and the Honourable Sharon Clayton as co-chairs, to thank the Australian members of the Australian Parliament who are part of this caucus, and to thank also, I saw on the screen, Nick Herbert, Lord Herbert, founder and chair of the Global TB Caucus, and also Results Australia for organising this event. And also, I'd like to thank Australia, because Australia has played a leadership role on the fight against TB, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region, and has also been a long-standing supporter of the Global Fund. Just reflecting on Warren's comments about TB and COVID, in 2020, COVID killed 1.8 million people. TB killed, Warren mentioned 1.4. Sadly, I think it probably is more than that, given what we saw in terms of the falls in case notification. I suspect when we get the numbers, it'll be more towards 1.5, 1.6. But in any case, TB killed 80 to 90% of the number of people who died from COVID, but probably attracted 1% of the resources and media. And the very fact that we don't know how many people died, whereas everybody in the world could get on Google and get a list of COVID deaths by country on January the 1st, tells you something about the relative attention applied to the diseases. And although in some countries it may feel like with the onset of vaccines that we are sort of coming through this and the light at the end of the tunnel is approaching, we are still in the middle of this global health crisis. By the end of this month, it will be, roughly speaking, 1 million people who will have died of COVID in 2021. That means that we will exceed the number of deaths from COVID in 2020 in the first half of 2021. Also, TB is likely to kill, almost certainly going to kill, more people in 2021 than 2020. And the reason is because we have seen dramatic falls in case notification. And if you don't identify and diagnose the cases, you don't treat them, and a proportion of the untreated people will die and go on to infect other people as well. I mean, in 13 of the highest burden TB countries, TB testing dropped by 29% in 2020 compared to 2019. And across a broader sample of 31 countries, we saw 44% fewer people tested for drug-resistant TB. This is more than 1 million people who would have been tested and treated who didn't get tested and treated. So there is a real need for concerted action, both to fight COVID and to mitigate the knock-on impact on TB. And remember, when it comes down to it, it is ultimately the same people. There's not much point in saving them from one disease, only from them to die of the other. The Global Fund has been very conscious of our responsibilities as the largest provider of external funding for TB across the world. We moved very swiftly in response to the pandemic to mobilize more money on top of the money we were already putting into our programming for HIV, TB, and malaria. About $1 billion we deployed to help countries respond to COVID and to mitigate the impact on HIV, TB, and malaria programs. The other positive news is that we've just started at the beginning of this year the next cycle of our grants. And following the success of our last replenishment, our grants are on average, our TB grants are on average 23% higher than they were in the previous cycle. But the scale of what we're dealing with and the disruption to services, to communities, the pressure on domestic funding for TB is such that we are going to need to continue to scale up and act with determination. Otherwise, we face an escalating disaster on some of the more vulnerable communities in the world as COVID and TB combine. One thing the Global Fund is doing is we're about to launch the second phase of our COVID response, supported by various donors, not least the United States, where included in the American Rescue Plan Act was $3.5 billion for the second phase of the Global Fund's COVID response. Now that may seem like a big sum of money, but when you look at the needs for PPE, for testing, for helping countries stabilize and get back on track on HIV, TB, and malaria, I can tell you the maths are such that that will go pretty quickly. We spent the first $1 billion really, really fast. So we face a very challenging, this is a hugely challenging World TB Day, but it's a day also where we need to draw from it a determination and a hope that we can change the trajectory. And we should learn from COVID. COVID has shown that if the world comes together, if that we really put scientific muscle in response to a disease, we put resources and communities and political leadership, we can achieve extraordinary things. We need that same determination with TB. It is actually shocking that this disease that was a pandemic, that we have left people behind with, that we haven't brought to an end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you in particular for joining us from Geneva. We really appreciate your time. The work of the Global Fund has always been important, but perhaps now more so than ever before. So thank you so much for that. We are privileged to have with us Nick Herbert, Lord Herbert of South Downs. Nick is the co-founder of the Global TB Caucus and has been involved in the fight against TB for nearly a decade. He is a member of the House of Lords in the United Kingdom, and thank you so much for joining us from nighttime in London. Over to you.
Well, thank you so much. And yes, it's not World TB Day here in the UK yet. We're still on Tuesday, and it's nevertheless a huge pleasure to join you and to team up with many old friends, in particular Warren Ench, who was involved with me right from the beginning in forming the Global TB Caucus. And World TB Day, as Peter Sands said, is always an important day for all of us who want to campaign to deal with this terrible disease. Important because TB is the orphan disease. We don't get the opportunities, we don't get very often the celebrity support and the attention that this disease deserves. And so having a dedicated day where we can jump up and down and raise the profile is always important, but it's doubly important this year for all of the reasons that Peter set out, because of the impact of COVID. And it's quite clear to us that COVID has had a twin effect, not only a devastating impact on TV programs themselves, but also diverting political attention, quite understandably, away from the existing pandemics and infectious diseases onto this new threat. It's entirely understandable that politicians would be preoccupied with that and be fearful of what was happening in their own countries. If there was a third effect, it was not only the diversion of political attention, it was that massive resources have been expended by countries in tackling COVID, and that has denuded exchequers. And so there is a risk that the resources that are available to fight other important causes, including the existing pandemics going forward, will be lessened. So all of these, I think, are multiple reasons to want to fly the flag particularly strongly on World TB Day this year. Like Peter, I see the flip side of this coin too, and that is that with the advent of COVID has come a greater political awareness about the risk of global pandemics, has come potentially an understanding of the need to strengthen healthcare systems, to strengthen surveillance, to invest in research and development, to ensure that we have the tools to fight these diseases. These are all opportunities for tuberculosis to reassert itself and the case for doing more to tackle this disease. And it is sobering to think that TB will be the second biggest killer of infectious diseases this year, not far behind COVID last year, and yet TB doesn't have a vaccine, as we all know, because frankly there hasn't been sufficient attention to that need. I just want to reinforce the really vital role of parliamentarians in this battle. We formed the Global TB Caucus because we felt it was necessary to try and strengthen the political voice for TB. Civil society is out there, as you all are, bravely, determinedly raising the profile of this disease. Governments are of course involved, but the missing link was very often parliamentarians, and yet it is parliamentarians who pass the laws, vote the money, elect the leaders very often, and have influence. And we do need to use our collective voice to raise the profile of this issue. And I think we've successfully done that in our own countries, as you have in Australia, with great results in unlocking greater resources in the fight against TB, and as we have in many other countries around the world where we form national TB caucuses, but also collectively where we work through multilateral organizations such as the G20, the G7, and at the UN high-level meeting 2 years ago. Let's conclude with a sobering thought. In 9 years' time, TB is meant to be beaten, according to the Sustainable Development Goal 3.3. TB, AIDS, malaria are all meant to be beaten in 2030. We're at D-9, and frankly, TB is decades away from being beaten in probably a century. We are dramatically off course. We won't get back on course unless political leaders at all levels are willing to speak out. That's why our voices are so important. It's why your voices in Australia are so important, and the leadership which Warren and your colleagues are showing is absolutely vital. And I commend you for that and for the bipartisan way in which you're approaching these issues. Please, if you're the NGOs, if you're the parliamentarians, continue to speak out and continue to give TB a voice so that we can once and for all put an end to this needless, this absolutely needless loss of life. Thank you for giving me the privilege and honor of joining you in your meeting this morning.
Thank you so much, Nick. Your passion for ending TB is infectious. We really appreciate your words and your time this evening in London, so thank you for that. Mr. Pat Conroy, the Shadow Minister for International Development and the Pacific, has kindly provided a short video, which we'll now put on for you.
Good morning to my fellow members of Parliament, to the Diplomatic Corps, to TB experts that are participating in today's event. As the Shadow Minister for International Development and Pacific, I am sorry I can't join you today, but I wanted to restate Labor's deep and abiding commitment to fighting TB, to supporting global efforts to eradicate TB. In this unprecedented time of the COVID pandemic, we must not lose focus on diseases like TB. We must not allow the natural concentration on rolling out a vaccine for COVID and restoring economies and societies devastated by COVID to allow us to lose focus on eradicating diseases such as TB. We need to retain and re-energise our commitment to eradicating TB, making sure that we continue to support the Global Fund and be part of multilateral efforts to eradicate TB, a disease that can devastate communities, families and entire societies. So on behalf of Labor, I wish you the best of luck for today's proceedings, and I look forward to joining you in the ongoing fight to eradicate TB.
Excellent. It's wonderful to have Labor's support. I would now like to invite Senator Rachel Stewart, who is the Senator for Western Australia and also the health spokesperson of the Australian Greens Party. Rachel will be talking to us this morning about Australia's role in assisting countries in our region to end TB. Over to you, Rachel.
I don't know about anybody else, but I can't hear.
Now, there we go. Can you hear now? Hello?
Hello.
Oh, right, you can hear me. Okay. Good morning. Before I start, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to speak, but particularly want to acknowledge that I'm sitting here on Ngunnawal Ngambri land in Canberra, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And as I said, thank you for inviting me to speak. I consider this a very important issue, but it's one that I think a lot of people, particularly in the higher GDP nations, actually don't realise that it's has such an impact, that it is still prevalent to the degree that it's the second highest killer. And so one of the jobs that I think we have in Australia is to raise awareness in our community about the impact of TB around the world, and particularly for our neighbours. And I'm sure, and I apologise, I had a bit of computer problems getting on, so I missed Warren, but I'm sure he made comments about the impact in the Torres Strait. But I think to build awareness and to build support for getting on board, as was pointed out, the celebs, we need to raise awareness in Australia, in other higher GDP countries where TB isn't such an issue. We need to raise awareness. Everybody's aware of the impact of COVID, and I think that if we highlight the impact of TB and in the same way to try and raise community awareness and to put pressure on both governments, and I entirely agree, we do need politicians raising this issue to put pressure on governments, but also to raise awareness in the community, because unless there's community awareness of the need to tackle TB, we're not going to get the pressure on the government and on other politicians to start lobbying to raise awareness of this issue. At the moment, people are very aware of health, the impact on health, and they're very aware now of the need to act globally as well as locally. So I think we should attempt to capitalise on the awareness now of health, the awareness of, as they say for COVID, no one's safe till everybody's safe. So we need to be raising awareness, and we also need to be raising awareness of the drug-resistant TB, because, as I said, the community don't realise that this is such an important issue globally, because in most of the higher GDP countries, it is not seen as a problem. So we are like was just stated from Labor, we are very supportive and support the campaign on TB, and are willing to ask questions and pursue government over commitment of funding, both from Australia and continue to fund Australia's commitment, but also urging Australia to be part of raising awareness globally and acting as a good global citizen on this issue. Thank you for inviting me to participate. I've very much enjoyed the time that I've been on, and I apologise that I'm going to have to hop off because I have a party room meeting prior to estimates. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. I know it's a very big day for senators in particular today, so thank you so much for your time and the support of the Greens. That's wonderful. We now have a short video message from the Minister for International Development and the Pacific, Senator Zed Ziselda.
As Australia's Minister for International Development and the Pacific, I'm pleased to be able to address you all as part of this important forum. Tuberculosis, and in particular drug-resistant tuberculosis, continues to be a major public health threat to the Indo-Pacific region. As I'm sure you're already aware, TB causes around 1.4 million deaths each year worldwide. And our region still bears 62% of the global burden of TB, with 12 high TB burden countries in our region, including India, Indonesia, the Philippines and Papua New Guinea. As the COVID-19 pandemic has made clear, our health and way of life can be fundamentally affected by communicable diseases. The Australian Government has committed $242 million to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria, to be spent over 3 years from 2020 to 2022. Our support will allow the Global Fund to provide people with access to TB services in more than 100 nations. Supporting health security throughout our region is an absolute priority for the Australian Government. In Papua New Guinea, Australia's support has been assessed as critical to the success of the PNG government's TB program. In Daru, the epicentre of drug-resistant TB in PNG's Western Province, Australia's sustained support has contributed to 99% of tuberculosis patients completing their treatment in 2018, up from 65% in 2014. To avoid drug resistance in TB, to help manage the effects of COVID-19 and to avoid future outbreaks of communicable diseases, Australia is supporting Indo-Pacific governments to strengthen their health systems. Australian funding has supported the development of new TB treatments and diagnostics through the TB Alliance and the Foundation for Innovative New Diagnostics. Through the Medical Research Future Fund, we will invest $28.4 million over 10 years, including a project to test new strategies to combat drug-resistant TB in the Pacific region, focusing on the hotspot of Kiribati, where every person aged over 3 years old will be treated. Together, we look forward to achieving a TB-free world.
Thank you very much for that. I understand some of our audience members couldn't hear those videos. We'll make sure that a recording of this whole session is sent out to everyone subsequent to the event, so that hopefully you'll be able to hear those excellent video recordings. I want to thank all of our wonderful speakers this morning who have joined us from all over the world and all over Australia. It's been really, I think, important to hear, particularly what COVID-19 has meant in our fight to end TB. And of course, there's a greater sense of urgency than ever before. I particularly want to thank Nick Herbert and Peter Sands, who have joined us from London and Geneva, respectively. And I understand you want to get on with your evening, so by all means do. So thank you so much for your time. Okay, I would now like to invite Dr. Suman Majumdar of the Bennett Institute to host our panel discussion. Suman is an infectious disease physician. He's the Deputy Program Director of Health Security at the Bennett Institute, and he's also a member of the Tuberculosis Working Group. On top of that, he's just also a wonderful person to work with. He's been a great ally, working very closely with Results, and we really appreciate his partnership and his time today. Over to you, Suman.
Thanks so much, Nagaya. Apologies, all my video is not working. I'll rejoin that. So firstly, speaking to you today from Melbourne, which is Wurundjeri land, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. We've got a great panel today for 30 minutes and then some questions. I'd like to introduce the three speakers that you see the profiles on their screen. Firstly, we're very lucky to have Dr. Stephanie Williams, Australia's Ambassador for Regional Health Security at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. We also have Ms. Anna Maria Harkins, who's the Director of External Affairs at the TB Alliance. We have Professor Warwick Britton, who amongst a number of roles is the head of the NHMRC TB Centre for Research Excellence. So we're going to walk through a number of issues and get perspectives from our three panelists today, and then we'll take questions at the end. So please note them and we'll go around for the parliamentarians. And there's some question function available in the chat as well. Just reiterating what the speakers have said today, we are really at a large crossroads with this global pandemic and its impact on TB. What we have seen in 2020 from the data that Peter mentioned is that there's been a dramatic impact on what is the main airborne pandemic, tuberculosis. 21% decline in TB diagnosis and treatment from what we know. 1.4 million people who have not received TB testing and care in 2020. And that's a setback of 12 years. So that's quite a salient and important issue. Now, having said that, there is an opportunity to move forward and a real opportunity to address TB and COVID together. The last few weeks we've seen an imminent crisis in COVID-19 in Papua New Guinea, which, as we mentioned, is one of the countries we support with a devastating TB epidemic. So we're going to discuss today how these two can be addressed together and what we can do going forward. So firstly, I'd like to ask Stephanie to address a question, which is why is 2021 and even beyond such a critical year for action on TB, and particularly talking to the health security agenda and your expertise and experience in that. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks very much for the opportunity to join the panel today. I think the reports and the interventions today have demonstrated that the falling back in progress to TB, which was already, in a way, becoming off track to the 2030 SDG goals, is now more urgent and important if those timeframes there, if we can continue to collect around the 2030 goal and ending the TB epidemic. But Simon, you asked to talk about whether the framing of global health security is part of that as it's relevant to TB, putting TB and COVID together. And I think I just want to make a few points around that. So COVID has reminded us of the centrality of health and health systems to safe, secure states and people. The global health security framing, I think, sort of emerged around 10 years ago, and it has traditionally been associated with the fast-moving infectious disease threats somewhere else that we don't want to be moving over state borders. When the Australian government established the Indo-Pacific Centre for Health Security, which is committed to reducing the risk of infectious disease across the Indo-Pacific region, we recognised that, yes, there were the fast-moving diseases and certain capabilities that we should be supporting countries to develop to minimise their risk of that. But at the same time, that there were preventable infectious diseases that kill people every day. And so much of the systems that we use to counter them overlap. They're not entirely the same, but they are the same. So many elements are the same. And Peter Sands, I think, said it well, the people at the centre of this is the same. So COVID, I think, started as something over there, something that we needed blunt measures, border lockdowns, as an example, social distancing, all this kind of very big, blunt tools of government to reduce spread. And then we see in so many countries the ability to connect with communities and people at the heart, whether you need to be active case fighting, improving community-based detection. Where COVID was able to tackle with people at the centre, we've seen much better success or suppression. And the Global Fund, the examples that Peter used before, is a really good example of that. So here we have the world's biggest global health investment vehicle with TB as one of its 3 priorities. which has been used to support COVID response in countries in order to preserve its work in TB. So it reminds us that, yes, you can sort of conflate and combine the goals of prevention of infectious diseases, that so much of what we do together is the same. So often the people at the heart of this, which is the most important part, are the same. But we have to recognise where it won't work. So there's a threat perception that has been there for COVID that I think, by virtue of the time scale, is not there for TB. And so when we come back to say, what about a framing of global health security is good and useful to do what Peter Sands mentioned earlier, to increase our scale and determination and urgency, I think we have to think really clearly about what has motivated governments to work in COVID and what about that can work in TB. And the report from last year about the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board had two things at the core of what was a successful response for COVID: empowered and engaged leadership, empowered and engaged citizens. And I think when we start with our framing of people and leadership, we can really use some of the strengths of the global health security agenda to lend to increasing our scale, our determination and efforts in TB. I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. It's a great framing. I might throw now to Anna Maria, if you could talk to moving forward. Why is there such a critical issue around the research and development pipeline to be perhaps highlighting some of the successes, but also the way forward?
Yes, thank you, Suman, and thank you everyone for inviting us to speak here on the cusp of World TB Day. I'll just preface what I'm about to say by just providing a little bit of context. TB Alliance is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to developing better and more affordable drug regimens to fight TB. And we've been operating with the support of Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs, Indo-Pacific Centre for Health Security for several years now. And they have funded us along the full gamut of our R&D pipeline, from providing support for innovative TB discovery to pivotal clinical trials and to product introduction and access work. So I really come from that perspective. When I think about this past year, it's really hard to boil it down, but let me just make 2 or 3 observations. Building on Dr. Williams, this year has cast global health security investments in health research in an entirely new light. I think each and every one of us now understands in painful detail that national economies, that the global economy, that wide swaths of industry depend on a wide arsenal of health technologies to keep everything running. And I'm including not just therapeutics, but diagnostics and obviously vaccines. Second, at the risk of stating the obvious, science works. And science has worked in a rather dramatic and accelerated fashion. But I think we also need to acknowledge that significant funding and urgent political will are the crucial determinants of the pace of progress against the TB pandemic and against the COVID pandemic. And I guess lastly, I'll just say that I think we need to acknowledge, and I know this has been said before, but it bears repeating, that the level of resources we've devoted to combating TB is not consistent with its impact. Again, 1.4 million die each year, 10 million people contract TB. Trying to put a positive light on it, I will say that look back on the past 20 years in terms of vaccine, diagnostics, and therapeutic development for TB, it has accelerated and we have made great inroads. And maybe I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the progress that we made really needs to be doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down, because we have the tools to respond to the TB pandemic, but we really need to put the muscle and the funding behind it. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Anna Maria. And Warwick, now to you. I'd like to ask you that same question around why it's such a critical point in time, but perhaps with a slant, additionally, of the basic science and research, some of the lessons from research in COVID applied forward to TB. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and thank you especially to the parliamentarians who joined us today for World TB Day, because it's critical, reflecting on what Stephanie said, that it's engagement with both the political leadership and with the citizenry which will make a big difference. The two things I think about in terms of both the science and practice of COVID, and coming from a hospital in Sydney, Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, where we've looked after all of the special health accommodation and quarantine hotels, I've been amazed at the extent of work and commitment to address the COVID problem in my colleagues. It's been outstanding. And the same's occurred in the research community. There have been remarkable achievements. However, those achievements require application, and the application needs strong support both from the government and the community. And just for example, there are now 3 words which you hear on the news each night, which you don't hear in the past. We hear about PCR testing for COVID. And of course, we hear now about contact tracing with genomic sequencing. We actually hear about the use of genomic sequencing, which can now occur within hours, to be applied in real time for tracing contacts between people in a quarantine hotel. It's extraordinary. And then we hear about the importance of vaccines. Over 180 vaccines developed, 3 being rolled out in Australia. Now, each of these 3 things are essential in our fight against tuberculosis. In fact, one of the PCR tests, the gene expert being used for the rapid diagnosis of COVID, was actually developed for tuberculosis. And if I had time in a minute, I'll explain how we've been using that in Vietnam in a remarkable clinical trial, which shows that the application of PCR-based diagnosis in a rural setting, miles from Ho Chi Minh City, over 3 years has halved the prevalence of tuberculosis and halved the incidence of transmission of TB to children. Now, this study, funded by the NHMRC, led by Guy Marks, is absolutely remarkable. It shows if you apply this in a high prevalence region, you can halve the prevalence of TB. However, to actually do that requires implementation of a scale and a change which we've not used in TB. And I'm actually proud to say that the NHMRC has funded the next study, in which we're rolling this out to treat both active TB and latent TB in Vietnam. And as the Senator mentioned, as part of the MRFF funding, we have a study called Pearl, which we hope to be the Pearl of the Pacific, where we actually show, using these technologies, that we can control TB in a high prevalence area, in particular in Kiribati. So I agree actually with Anna that over the last few years, we have developed the tools now that we can apply to make a huge difference. The challenge is to prove that we can do it in many settings, to take that proof to change policy, and to take that change policy to our political leaders and to get them to fund them. So I speak about vaccines in a moment, Suma.
Thanks, Warwick. Thanks all. So the next question I'd like us to tackle is from the Australian investment perspective, and particularly our role in the Indo-Pacific region. We've heard about some of the investments today, the support to MDR-TB in Papua New Guinea, the upcoming investments in the Pacific and Kiribati, some work in Indonesia. Now, some of these mechanisms are through the Global Fund, through the Indo-Pacific Centre for Health Security, through our research mechanisms, the NHMRC and MRFF. Stephanie, do To you first, how have our investments contributed to the TB response to date, and what more do you see is needed?
Thanks, Simon. I just want to reiterate Warwick's point about how the only way we could have got COVID diagnostics to the region was on the back of TB investment in the Gene Expert machines that we were already there when the diagnostic cartridges, and how actually the COVID response has been enabled by so much of work and investment in TB to date by virtue of the technology example alone. But your question is around what is the results and response of the Australian investment. I think the first point to make is that Australia remains committed to the WHO NTB strategy and supporting countries in our region in their own goals to eradicate TB. I think through DFAT's Health for Development and ODA budget, we take a multi-mechanism approach, recognising that as people well know, there is a role for investment at global, regional and country level. We need multiple pathways and vehicles. So, and I've summarised them from my own head in terms of a bit of 4 Ps. The product development, which Anna has already explained, the global public good of product development partnerships, upstream investment in new research, and we've heard good results from the TB Alliance and FIND already this morning. There's the practical implementation research. So we do, through the Centre for Health Security, fund Australian with researchers in the region to evaluate new products and interventions to improve clinical care in high burden countries such as Indonesia and TB. And I think a good example was last year in Yogyakarta during COVID-19. One of our research partners was able to continue their current active case finding and TB preventive treatment by working with COVID teams, and conducted TB screening amongst COVID suspects. Over 8,000 people being screened with 35 new TB cases detected and treated. It's a small example, but useful to be thinking about how we do have a role in investing in the research partnerships to demonstrate Warwick's point, which is you need to prove that it works and makes a difference. The third P, I think, is in the global partnership. So Australia's investment in the Global Fund for AIDS, TB and Malaria has been highlighted by the Minister, Minister Seselja, by Peter Sands as well. We increased our contribution from 2020 to 2022. I have the great privilege of sitting as Australia's board member of the Global Fund board. So as in the constituency with Canada and Switzerland and Australia. And the reason for mentioning that is that not only do we invest financially in enabling these big global health institutions to achieve the global health goals, we have a policy role at the board. For example, Australia has long argued for the use of what the Global Fund calls catalytic funding, money that's not necessarily allocated to countries, but money that's used for important interventions that wouldn't otherwise be funding. And TB case finding is one of those innovative trials that the catalytic funding from the Global Fund has enabled over recent years. So we have a partnership, but we also have a policy role on the boards. And the last P is the program. So as it has already been mentioned, and we saw the videos of Daru, direct country-based service delivery in partnership with both Australian partners, but importantly, and most importantly, national governments and provincial governments in our region to be supporting financially and practically with the tools and strategies to scale up screening, testing, treatment for TB. So we do that within a wide portfolio of global, regional and country investments.
Thanks so much. Warwick, I'll go to you now. You've already mentioned some of the work in Vietnam that's so critical. Could you please give us a sense of some of the other specific examples of Australian investment in research and public health that have translated to this issue of TB?
Okay, so I would firstly say that in Australia, this is really driven through our National Health and Medical Research Fund and the Centre of Research Excellence in TB Control, for which we have a second from the NHMRC, has actually been very critical in bringing together TB researchers around Australia. And unfortunately, there are many fewer who work in TB than work in malaria and HIV, I'm afraid to say. However, the thing we have in our favour is we do work together. And that is critically important, I think, for making a difference. And the second thing is we really do have a focus in our region through the active case finding trials in Vietnam, led by Guy Marks and others, through the work in Papua New Guinea, through the Burnett Institute, through the work in Indonesia, and now the work in Pacific. Each of these actually projects work together and feed together. And I just make the point that this has now been recognised in our region. And just recently, Wipro has announced a WHO collaborating centre for tuberculosis, developed really through the TBCRE. It will be based in Sydney, as it has to have a home, but it is really to facilitate all TB researchers in Australia to have direct role and involvement in our region. And it is very critical to have these strong regional connections. The example of TB vaccines I make as someone who's been working in this for 20 years, I am pleased to say that we really have made major steps, but steps which will need to be built upon. Recently, there's been a clinical trial which shows that a simple form of TB vaccine had about 50% protection in Southern Africa. 50% is not enough. We know we need to have a vaccine that has about 80% protection against adult tuberculosis and TB transmission. And if we have that, that will be one of our strongest tools to control TB. So we've been working in Sydney, and my colleague Jamie Trickers has developed a vaccine with colleagues in Adelaide, working in a different field, providing a critical adjuvant that we feel will be able to make a real contribution in this space. Very interesting, most recently, because of COVID, we have taken some of the rules that we learned through TB vaccines and applied them to COVID research. And I believe that we will need more vaccines in COVID than just the ones we have available as yet. And we have developed two, which we're testing in a model of COVID infection. One of these vaccines, we now have evidence can protect against both TB and COVID. And there is a long way to go, and my Professor Jamie Trickers and Phil Hansbrough and others are working very assiduously. But the concept of having a vaccine which we could apply in adults in a practical way for both control of TB and COVID is a very attractive one. I'd make one comment about vaccines. Most of the testing of TB vaccines, in fact, almost all, has occurred in sub-Saharan Africa. And for a number of years, we've lobbied with the Gates Foundation and others, and ERIS when it was working, that we really need to have vaccine testing sites in Asia. 2/3 of the tuberculosis is in Asia. Over 60%, 66% of drug-resistant TB is in our region. And yet we have not developed and not convinced the global community that we need to have places where we can test the vaccine. This is complex. It requires cooperation of governments, regional governments, as well as national governments. But I think this is one particular area where we could take a leadership role, not just to take vaccines developed in other countries and without being parochial, we also have candidates which can be tested in our region. I think the demonstration, and it's astounding what has happened with COVID vaccines. It's, for an immunologist, this is just amazing. It demonstrates that when we work together, we can make a rapid difference. And I would hope that within the next couple of years, we'll be talking about centres for testing vaccines for combining the use of vaccines and short course therapy to be making a radical difference to TB in our region. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Warwick. And just to add to that with My Liberty, that we can do a lot with applying our current tools. We can actually bring down rates to a huge level, and then there's an exciting prospect of new tools. So segue to Anna Maria to just quickly give us an overview of some of the products and the developments, particularly from TB Alliance and testing as well.
Thank you, Suman. I'll just briefly talk about, I think, our most recent product that through Australia's investment, we've brought a short, and by short, I mean 6-month, all oral 3-drug regimen from research to approval and now to market for highly drug-resistant TB infections. So the most deadly and costly manifestation of this disease. It's been a life-saving game changer for TB patients with highly drug-resistant TB who the cure rate at this point is about 90% as compared between 32 and 50%. So it's truly transformational. And I'll just finish with really an aspirational, but I think achievable long-term goal for TB Alliance. And that is to develop a 2-week-long TB therapy that would lift immense burdens from patients and healthcare systems. And as Warren said, that will most likely need to involve novel approaches, artificial intelligence, host-directed therapy, immunotherapeutics and therapeutic vaccines, all of that. That's the sort of full toolkit that we need to be able to deploy moving forward. So I think we need to set our sights on that. It's ambitious, but it's doable.
Thanks, Anna Maria. And for the non-TB attuned, but I know the MPs now are very much TB champions. The words that we hear in COVID, testing, contact tracing, treatment and care, vaccines, all the stuff that we're doing through the same systems is the things that we've been doing in TB for decades now. And it's really this acceleration that is the opportunity. And now that it's front of mind, there is an opportunity to do more. I'm going to now, just so we can get some questions in, just ask each speaker in 30 seconds to really give us your conclusion around what is needed now in the next steps going forward for tuberculosis and with this opportunity with COVID. Stephanie, then Warwick, and then Anna Maria.
I think to the first point around our focus on leadership and people and being able to distill what is unique to TB and requires its own strategy, but being able to work with where systems and investment exists in broad infectious disease, health system strengthening is our challenge. I think I would echo Peter Sand's words at the beginning about determination and scale being our defining frame for how we work on the NTB strategy.
Thank you. Thanks.
Sorry. Realistically, I think there will be a crisis over the next year or two to ensure in the context of COVID, and we know that COVID is and may have its maximum in some countries in our region over the next year or two. So there is a crisis situation for controlling, for maintaining TB control in the current context. And then the second thing is then bringing some of the tools that we know that work, and what Anna said about this short course therapy for MDR-TB is extraordinary. How we are going to bring that to a field situation, in a situation where TB is increasing in the context of COVID. That will be the challenge.
Thank you. Anna Maria.
We've said the word investment several times, and I want to emphasize investment because we need to think about funding global health as an investment. It's an investment in our security, in our economies, in our educational systems, and we really need to stop treating research funding as just another cost center. that's often siloed inside overseas development assistance budget lines, and really start acting like our lives depend on it, because in fact our lives do depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very well said. So we've got 5 minutes for some questions, and I'd like to just throw to the members of Parliament and ambassadors first, if you'd like to direct questions, and then I can facilitate. Audience members that have joined the call, you can use the chat box, and we'll see them and we'll address them. Warren, I'm going to probably call to you because I haven't heard you be silent. So please. Oh, we've answered everything. There we go. Thank you.
I'll have to get some distance here. I can't see him.
Yes,
right,
we can hear you. We can hear you now. Thank you.
You got me now.
Yep. Yep.
I was quite surprised, Warwick, when you made that reference that all of the work, that all the testing that's being done at the moment is done in the sub-Sahara area. That was quite a revelation to me. I thought work was being done over in our way, particularly when you have a situation like we have in Papua New Guinea, where you have one of the one of the real and one would have thought it would be a no-brainer to be actually testing. In fact, I was under the impression that there was work being done on testing in PNG, but clearly I'm wrong.
Will I answer, Suman? I was
Yes,
speaking
please.
particularly in the context of vaccine testing. I think some of the drug studies and operational research is actually being done in our region, and particularly a number of the clinical trials and active case finding. But in the testing of vaccines, yes, unfortunately, I think one of the reasons is it does require development of infrastructure. And I think initially people invested the infrastructure for vaccine studies, particularly in South Africa, where there's a huge amount of TB. And that has produced very important results. I think though the argument I'm making, and I think this is also recognised elsewhere, is we now need to be also doing that in some of the high burden regions. It does require infrastructure, Warren. It requires capacity and both laboratory and health system. But I think it's a challenge we should address.
Warwick, I've gone to many of the, involved in many of these, but I've never heard any reference to the fact that James Cook University in Cairns, we have a tropical health facility there, but we've also got there is one element of it that where they're actually researching on vaccines for tuberculosis specifically, and they've got a number of researchers there, Louis Schofield and Professor Schofield and a number of others that are working on this. They've also got another facility up on Thursday Island in the Torres Strait, which is very short distance from one of the highest burden regions in the world, of course, in Daru, in the Western Province. And I would have thought that would be the sort of infrastructure. We've got the capacity there. We've got world-class researchers there that are working specifically on vaccines, and I would have thought that would be a practical way to get them involved somehow, to do some trials up in our region.
Well, I think we hope that in the current discussions, without getting too involved in the technicalities, that in fact that will be the direction which will happen. That's the direction that we want to take the international vaccine research community.
Maybe all it will take is an invitation for them to participate. I've actually encouraged them to go. There was a conference in India a couple of years ago, and I arranged for them to participate there. They almost seem like they're one of their secrets. I mean, I know they're very actively involved in it, but maybe we just need to give a little bit of encouragement, some invitations, and a bit of support to get them take them to the next stage.
I can chip in there just quickly to say that the PNG Institute of Medical Research has got a long history of vaccine research across other diseases, and they're looking to build their TB capacity, and some of the Australian investments are supporting the PNG IMR and the University of Papua New Guinea. And in fact, one of the MRFF grants is in PNG to look at this community-wide approach, thinking about vaccines, but not the level Warwick's saying of trialling a new vaccine, but looking at existing, rolling out BCG to older people, for example. So there are some efforts going on there through research. It's challenging, but I think the point Warwick made earlier is these regional partnerships. It takes time to build them, but they've actually come together quite well across a number of countries now and within the countries. So I think there's a great platform, and I might just go to Stephanie lastly, if you'd like to add to that from the Indo-Pacific Health Security Centre perspective.
Oh, Simon, just to echo that we do support and enable the partnerships for research and testing of treatments and implementation research for TB in PNG and Indonesia and several countries. And to your point around our support to PNG IMR, I think really illustrates, one, the long-term partnership that so many Australian institutions have with the PNG Institute of Medical Research, and how events like this and dialogue with the community help us, the TB community, can push us forward in thinking about what, expanding those research collaborations in particular for novel treatments or vaccines or diagnostics in the region. So I would just echo the sentiments to date, is that we absolutely have a role in enabling implementation research partnerships in our region, and have a number of investments that are making a positive step in that direction.
Thank you. Okay, so that's been a great panel, and thank you for your time. I'll just have one concluding statement, which is to say that, you know, the progress in COVID's been remarkable with research, development and country support. But if we do nothing to address TB as another airborne pandemic along with it, then we will have failed. So I think it will be a critical juncture going forward amongst that. Back to you, Nagoya. Thanks, or over to Sharon Clayton for closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon. And I also want to thank our wonderful panelists for a really rich discussion. We covered a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time, so thank you so much. I'd now like to formally invite Sharon Clayton, who is the Labor member for Newcastle and also one of our wonderful co-chairs of the Australian TB Caucus, for some closing remarks and a vote of thanks. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and I'm very conscious of the time, but I do want to thank all of the speakers for the discussion this morning. Special thanks to Nick Herbert, who came in from the UK, of course, to Peter Sands, but also to the Minister and my colleague Pat Conroy, who joined us, all the parliamentary colleagues who've been on and off this morning. Please, you know, just understand that people are coming in and out as their timetables require. To the representatives from the embassies and high commissions, to all our partners, and a massive shout out to Results for the incredible organising of this morning. And you are a great support to both Warren Ench and myself as co-chairs of this Australian TB Caucus, and we really do appreciate it. There's lots of strong take-home messages from this morning's discussion, and I think that they are matters that both Warren and I will try to progress. But certainly there is a, you know, as a parliamentarian and as a co-chair of the Australian TB Caucus, you know, very conscious of the need to be taking actions to try and increase our commitments, our financial investments really into TB now and in this budget cycle and beyond. This is a tough ask, of course, but there is strong bipartisan advocacy around this issue in the Australian Parliament, and we do recognise that in a time of crisis some extra effort is indeed required. So thank you for your advocacy this morning. And I just wanted to end with just that reminder to everyone that there is some 50 locations now around Australia that will be lighting up red for World TB Day. And I do encourage everyone to try and visit one, whether you're in Canberra or one of the other 49 locations in Australia. I think there will be, as Warren mentioned at the start, the old Parliament House is going to be lit up this evening from 7:30. So it's a kind of nice way to escape this building at the moment, the new Parliament House, and get down to have a look at that. So again, just want to end thanking Results, the Secretariat of the Australian TB Caucus, all the partners who have joined in, who helped make this possible, and for each and every one of you this morning for your participation and leadership on this incredibly important issue. Thanks very much.